Right, so yeah, this is a partnership between the National Trust for Scotland and the Glenlivet, the single malt distillery based at Glenlivet, and we kicked off last year. It was originally designed to be a big participation, sort of public excavations and things like that. Last year, so none of that really happened. So we did a lot more small scale. We're currently digging at Glenlivet this week. With a small group of volunteers, so we'll get to that towards the end. But I'll just run through what it is that we've done so far, and then hopefully where we're going a little bit later. So why the partnership, the National Trust for Scotland? Well, we all know it's a huge part of the image of Scotland. There's 130 malt grain distilleries. Huge business, absolutely enormous. 4.9 billion pounds in 2019, up by 200 million the year before. It's a big part of the image of Scotland internally and internationally as well. And we wanted to kind of drill down into that and think about why has it become such a part of the identity? Why is it such a strong sort of economic driver as well? And what in the past happened to make this such a powerful image? So going right back in terms of whiskey, I'm not going to go too early, but we certainly know that in Europe, in 1500s, there's sort of some white spirit is being produced. I absolutely adore this picture. It looks to me like after you've made a bit of whiskey, you'd all get in a circle and have a little dance. It's quite nice. And then we know through time you start to see these references to aquavita, so this water of life, and we see this reference to a distilled spirit, the water of life, coming through in Scotland as well. So specifically at NTS, Falkland Palace, we've got a reference from James IV here, talking about 8 bowls of malt for the production of aquavita, and that's the earliest reference that I can find. But if anybody knows any more, please let us know. It's another good one. This one's one of my favourites. Again, Iona, another National Trust for Scotland place. 1609, statute on Iona blaming excessive drinking of aquavita on the Highlands and Islands and its barbarity. So it's from this point on that people start to think about it being taxable almost, needing to control its movement, although whiskey in the home or distilling in the home is still allowed. You then, rushing forward, first tax on sales introduced in 1644, and then in a surprise move, actually, Cromwell lowers the tax on whiskey in Scotland, but improved the system of tax collection. So actually made more money than previously off his taxing. And then in 1660, it's the evil gauges, the exciseman is introduced. And it's the exciseman going out hunting this illicit distilling activity, which starts to generate all the disruption and all the dissatisfaction across Scotland. Just to give you a little example of cost and taxes, 1652 is the equivalent of £6 a litre today in tax. Last year, 2020, we were looking at £13 a litre. So actually, it's a leap, but it's not a huge leap. £6 a litre was probably quite a heavy burden. And then by the 1700s, you get this romanticism, this golden age of illicit whiskey. It becomes part of the Victorian image of Scotland. You've got this image of John Petty again. You've got the barbaric Highlander fighting off the exciseman. And it was trying to come to terms with that image and think, how has that developed over time? Was it really the kind of romantic battle that we think, or was it a more common day pursuit? Little bits of work in the past, all fantastic pieces of research, but not a huge amount of actual excavation looking at the material evidence for illicit distilling activity. So we started to think about what was, in this broader project, how could we kind of grow our information? How could we look at these Landseer images and actually identify in the landscape what people were doing in their day-to-day lives and their relationship with the production of whiskey? Started with our own collections. We realised that actually the National Trust for Scotland has got quite a few artefacts of itself related to this story and this history of whiskey. Up in the top left there is still a fragment from the Angus Folk Museum, now in the House of Dun Museum. Again, that's a small domestic still. Up on the top right, we've got this Shivers Brothers bottle, which again is a nice connection because the Glenlivet is owned by Shivers and they're our sponsors for the project. So there's a nice sort of depth of partnership there. And then the King's Ransom from the SS politician, Whiskey Galore, another famous sort of story and a big image for Scotland. With these artifacts, we started thinking about people can't get to our digs just yet, or couldn't up to this week. So we're able to laser scan these things, make them available online, so people can actually start to investigate these things and maybe access them in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do in the past. One of the other things as well, we started to think quite scientifically about these things. I think, what can we extract from the artifacts themselves? So this Kortaki still, so this one from the House of Dun, we thought it's got all these concretions around the outside, it's got material inside it as well, concreted to the inside. So we thought we'd try some lipid analysis working with friends at AOC and down in Bristol University to see if we could identify what kind of fuels or what kind of actual liquids or grains are being used inside these stills. The lesson learned from this is, when handling collections, always wear gloves, because the contamination of the piece being passed from person to person over the last 100 years meant that we couldn't get anything from it. So that was a bit of a shame, but worth a try. So still site themselves, the archaeological record. On Trust land, we think up to now about 30 have been identified. I think if you look into Canmore, there's probably I think it's probably pushing more like 100. But when you think about the survey work that was done at somewhere like Strathconnell, I think it was Nosas, I think they found nearly 50 of these potential illicit whisky still sites. So there are a lot more of these places out there than we've identified. Jonathan Wordsworth sent me a brilliant reference the other day from, I think it was 1898, I think. And there was a record of 14,000 prosecutions in the Highland for smuggling or illicit distilling. 14,000 in a single year. So there are clearly going to be a lot more of these sites out there, and we just haven't defined them. Defining them, again, look at that Landseer picture. It's a brilliant, brilliant illustration. What are the physical identifiers for us as archaeologists? Fuel, water, grain, the still itself, copper, containers for moving these things. Position in the landscape could be a big giveaway as well. So we started thinking about this a while ago. This is Ben Lomond, and this is the classic story of an illicit still site. It's locally referred to. We know about it from chatting to people who live there. It's positioned high up against the side of this waterfall on a small ledge. The idea being that the steam or the smoke would be hidden by the spray from the waterfall. It's out of sight. It's hidden away. The excise and gauges aren't going to get to it. So these are the kind of places we're thinking about. So the first bit of field work this year was Mar Lodge Estate. If any of you have been there in the Cairngorms, absolutely beautiful place. It's our largest property by a long shot. Huge, enormous bit of landscape. But it goes back a long time. We've got these medieval hunting forest from at least 1350 in the possession of the Earls of Mar, and then they then lose the rights to the estates, forfeited after the 46 uprising. But there's brilliant, brilliant landscape records and settlement records based on archival research and survey done in the 1990s by the Royal Commission. And we know that there's lots of townships spread around them. There's some great phasing as well from 17th, 18th, 19th century. This map here, you can see, it shows Mar Lodge. You've got Braemar to the right, Linn of Dee, and then the Dee going off to the left. And you can see all of these numbered sites here are all townships, sort of clusters of farms, and each one of these seems to have had a still site associated with it along its burns and water courses. Again, looking at the sort of landscape history, you'd have seen places like this yourselves. We've got tenancies from about 1719. Then we've got clearance as woodland is being exploited by landowners. Then there's resettlement. There's another period of clearance in order to open up the land as a hunting reserve or forest. And then resettlement again with large sheep farms, which again are cleared in the Victorian period to open it all up for hunting again. And then this is one of the sites there. So this is Carn Vither. So that's me on the right. And on the left is Alan Winchester, who's the master blender for Glenlivet. So he's multiple generations of whiskey makers working here on Speyside. And it's great being able to work with him because we can find these places, but he can explain to someone like me what the process is going into this making of illicit whiskey. And so it's great to have him coming out into the field with us. So you can see it's quite a small bothy, sits tucked down into the hillside, and there's about 8 of these so far identified at Mar Lodge. And here we are, we've got Derek there. We went out, we drew these sites, we recorded them, see if we could compare size-wise what could go on within these buildings. But one of the big questions that came up as well is, when is a bothy not a shieling, and when is a shieling an illicit distilling bothy? How are these buildings in the landscape differing to mean that there might be whiskey production going on, or there might be other practices? Again, this hidden nature of some of these places. This is I've forgotten the name of this one. Craig Fadrig. No, that's in Inverness. I can't remember this one. It'll be written on a slide somewhere. Again, it's tucked up alongside a waterfall. The spray from that waterfall is going to hide the smoke from your still. You've got a nice rock face for a lean-to. You've got great views up and down the Dee. Absolutely no way of telling where this place is when you're standing on the Dee looking up the hill. It's tucked right in there. It is Craig Fadrig, I remembered. There we go. So this, again, go back to Carnvither. This is the site, a dry stone circular structure. But you can see on the image on the top left, when it's excavated, you've got this water course running in from the left, and then you've got it running out down the hill to the bottom of that slide. And again, you're bringing this water resource in, you're using it to cool the worm, to create that distilling and turn that steam into liquid and to catch that distilled liquid. We excavated this 100% sampling, so myself and Derek carried 200 litres of soil down off that hill, shared it with our friends at AOC to look to see what kind of organic material might have been preserved in there. Quite excited at the idea of finding some grain, being able to discover some secret old recipes. Absolutely nothing in it. Scottish acid, Highland soils maybe, a little bit of heather, charcoal in there, but it's a grouse moor, so you might expect that. So yes, so the soil science was a little bit disappointing on this site, but that might point at the idea of that maybe the grain malting or the actual grain itself is stored and malted somewhere else, and what's happening here is just the pure end phase distilling, and actually that creates no waste other than liquid or other than the mash that's left over, and that's going to disintegrate over time or quite often get fed to the cattle. This is the site. You can see there that water course running down into it, turning at right angles and running out. It sits low in the hill. It's on a slight slope, so you could heather thatch that and it would completely disappear into the landscape. This is the next site at my lodge, Bynack Lodge. And again, it's a Victorian hunting lodge. You can see the remains of the buildings down below, but before that it was a sheep farm, and before that it was a post-medieval settlement and farmstead. The site itself is only about 200 metres up the Bynack burn from the lodge itself, and you can see that the remains in the top right there. And again, the excavation. We've currently got the soils from this with CFA at the moment, so they're looking at that for us, so we don't have any results there. But we did actually find artifacts, which is nice because we hadn't found them previously up at Carnvither. So we've got this slipware, I think, on the top left, and on the top right, we've got these clay pipe fragments. I think looking at the decoration on the ceramic, I found a comparable one from a kind of late 17 to mid 1800s. If anybody knows any different, please let us know, because again, we're gonna pay a bit more attention and try and drill into that and really get a firm date for it. But it would be interesting to see whether or not this bothy is actually being used for whisky production during the period at which Bynack is a hunting lodge as well. So whether or not there's quite a longevity for illicit activity around there. And then we went to Torridon over on the west coast as well, which was great because we've over the years, Jill Harden did some fantastic survey and compiling of data for the Torridon estate. And also a local chap, Murdo MacDonald, wrote this great book, The Battle of the Black Pot, which was compiling all of the court records and all of the sort of known newspaper pieces about whisky production, illicit production and smuggling sort of in and around Torridon. And this gave us some fantastic clues as to where some of these places would be. So again, off we went, headed out. I think there's about 8 sites there. We've added a few more. This on the top left, you can see a lochen, quite high. up in the landscape there. And again, there's another small lade running off that, running straight through the centre of a dry stone building. So again, we're thinking that this water flow is part of the process, and that whiskey could have been made there. The camera's all about digging for Britain are involved. They came up to take a chat, and we're also filming this week's dig at the Glenlivet as well as part of their programme. So hopefully more people can learn about these places. This is a dreadful slide with too much writing on it, but I wanted to show you from Murdo's book about Battle of the Black Pot. This is a record of a capture of one of these illicit stills, and just to sort of jump to the end of that. So what they found when the excisemen found people in the bothy, this thing in the bothy was 12 gallons and 60-gallon capacity washbacks. Some with the wash still in them, low wine receivers, 60 gallons, 2 worm tubs, a brewing tub, a wash charger, a tin of yeast, 5-gallon flask, a tin can, old-fashioned lamps, 2 creels, kitchen pot, teapot, number of bottles, spade, empty sacks, horn, drinking cup, clothing, oatcakes, potatoes. Oh, for an archaeologist, this is a finds list. Surely we can find this. So off we went to take a look, and we found it. We were very pleased. So this is Laggy Dhu at Torridon, and again you can see from that photograph in the top left how it's tucked in next to these large rock falls and these large rock faces, and you've got these dry stone walls where you could have a crook frame or some kind of lean-to roof structure. Again, fully sampled this site, and these are being looked at the moment as well, so we don't have any organic remains to report on just yet, but we're hoping over the next couple of weeks. And we found bottle remains as well, which look like they're we found one similar this week with the words 6 to the gallon printed on the bottom, and I think I'm right. If you work that out, it's about 750 millilitres, so comparable to a whiskey bottle size today, which is quite interesting. It's interesting that bottling might be happening at these illicit sites as well, because obviously small barrels and things like that are much easier for moving around, so finding glass, it might be quite unusual. So this is the site itself. This just gives you a sense of how, again, it's tucked into the landscape and it's hidden within this this large rock outcrop, and you get the scale with the diggers in there as well, so you can get a feel for the size of this bothy. Right, through, and then this week we're at Glenlivet. But why are we at Glenlivet? Well, actually, the site we're digging at isn't the current Glenlivet distillery. It's the earlier one, which was started by George Smith, who was the first licensed distiller on Speyside. Got his license in 1824. But he'd obviously been producing whiskey prior to that 1824 date. He was just the first one to get the license. So again, we were interested to see how this complex of buildings and how this farm that he lived on had developed from illicit beginnings right through to almost the industrialization of the process, right up to 1859, when it was moved down the hill to be the current Glenlivet distillery that you can come and visit today. So this plan on the left was done in 1994 by a Mr. Derek Alexander. Only worked for CFA. It's quite nice. So this is where we are this week. You can see in the top left there's the current Glenlivet distillery. The arrow at the top shows where George Smith's original first legal distillery was, and then at the left at the bottom there you can see how we've actually uncovered the fire bases for where the stills would have sit, for where the whiskey would have actually been produced. And on the top right there you can see a small lock cover, keyhole cover, says Gottlieb Patent. And looking that up last night, Gottlieb were the locksmiths that were contracted by the excise authority to make the strong boxes that they used in order to in the offices within each of the distilleries in which they were employed. So again, we've got this immediate connection on site. So what this is allowing us to do, again, to work with Alan, the master distiller in the bottom right there, to connect up these remains, to look at how these buildings work as a machine. So where the grain comes in, where the drying's happening, where the distilling's happening, where the bottling is, and how it leaves out the other end, and then compare that to the way that it's done today and how those ideas of how distilling has happened over time might have changed. You can catch up with all of this. We've got a website, we've got an open call for any stories. If anybody knows of any areas, wants to share information from their area about this, so we can start to build up these national archives and these national stories, because we know again from NOSAS's survey, there's many more of these places out there. And as part of it, we've also had artists commissioned to do work with us to come and get inspired by these landscapes and by these heritage. We've had a ceramicist, a sound artist, a photographer, and a creative writer. And again, all of these pieces of work inspired by this archaeology are all available through the NTS website. And just to finish off, as I say, we've got this open day on Saturday at Glenlivet, so please do come along and take a look. But our partnership with Glenlivet, you know, they're interested in this heritage as being part of their story, but also as a promotional tool, thinking about, you know, sort of the deep history and how people are interested in heritage. So on the left-hand side here, you've got a newspaper cutting from the late 1800s from the Isle of Wight, advertising whiskey made in the old illicit style and the way it would be smuggled from the Highlands, giving it a particular smooth and good quality. And on the right hand side there, you've got the special illicit still Glenlivet 12-year-old, which they released just last year as part of their marketing drive to engage with this heritage. So 100-year apart, but fundamentally the same marketing. Thank you very much. I shall stop there.